What happens when a 22-year-old millionaire's son walks into Judge Caprio's courtroom, laughs at the law, and actually tells the judge, "You work for people like me." Before you hear the sentence that froze the whole room, drop a comment telling us whether arrogance should ever earn mercy. Because by the end of this story, one person would be shattered, three victims would finally be heard, and a courtroom built on patience would witness a reckoning nobody in Providence would ever forget. The morning it happened, Courtroom 2B at the Providence Municipal Courthouse on Dorrance Street looked almost ordinary. The clock over the rear doors read 8:47 a.m. The radiator hissed. Papers rustled. Someone in the back row coughed into a wool scarf. Hit that subscribe button if you believe respect should matter more than money, because the first 30 seconds of this hearing told everyone exactly what kind of disaster was about to unfold. Mason Mercer arrived 6 minutes late. He did not walk in like a defendant. He floated in like a customer entering a private club that had kept him waiting. Navy Tom Ford jacket, crisp white shirt with the collar slightly open, black Gucci horsebit loafers so polished they flashed beneath the fluorescent lights, platinum Patek Philippe watch, fresh haircut, no tie, no apology. He carried his sunglasses in one hand and his confidence like a weapon. Beside him was Carson Vale, one of the most expensive defense attorneys in Rhode Island, gray suit pressed sharp enough to cut glass, leather briefcase tucked under his arm, expression already exhausted. Behind them came Victor Mercer's assistant, a woman named Kendra Lynn, balancing a coffee tray and two phones, as if even the courthouse had to adapt to the Mercer schedule. If you've ever seen someone mistake privilege for immunity, like this video, if you believe consequences hit harder when a person thinks they'll never come. Because Mason was not there for one simple traffic fine, no matter how his lawyer wanted it to look. Case number PMC 2511847 had started with reckless driving and leaving the scene of a property collision. By that Friday morning in November 2025, it carried amended allegations, witness intimidation concerns, a pending restitution report, and a judge who had already reviewed the file twice. Judge Caprio entered without fanfare, the way real authority often does. No dramatic stomp, no theatrical glare, just a quiet presence that made people sit straighter, black robe, silver-framed glasses, a face so calm it almost invited disrespect from the foolish. Court Clerk Donna Vidal stood to his right with the docket. Bailiff Sergeant Mike Donnelly moved near the rail, hands folded, eyes alert. Officer Elena Ruiz, the arresting officer, sat on the left side in full uniform, body cam footage already logged into evidence. Judge Caprio glanced over the room once, then down at the file. "Mr. Mason Mercer," he said. Mason didn't answer immediately. He was leaning toward Carson, whispering something that made Kendra cover a smile. The judge looked up. "Mr. Mercer." Mason finally lifted his chin. "Yeah, I'm here." A tiny shift moved through the gallery. Not loud, just enough. The kind of reaction that says everyone heard the tone before the words finished landing. Share this with someone who needs to see what happens when confidence crosses into contempt, because Judge Caprio did not raise his voice. He simply rested his hands on the bench and said, "In this courtroom, sir, we begin with 'Good morning, Your Honor.' It costs nothing and reveals quite a lot." That line alone would have made a clip, but this was only the opening move. Mason smiled the way people smile when they think charm can erase behavior. "Good morning, Your Honor." "Better," said the judge. "Now let us see whether the rest of your conduct can improve as quickly as your vocabulary." A few people in the back exhaled laughter into their coats. Mason heard it. His jaw tightened. Donna read the allegations into the record. On October 17, 2025, at approximately 11:43 p.m., Mason Mercer was observed driving a black 2024 BMW M8 Competition westbound on Atwells Avenue at a speed later estimated at 82 miles per hour in a 30-mile zone. Surveillance and witness statements indicated he ran a red light at Dean Street. sideswiped a parked 2016 Honda Civic belonging to Tasha Bennett, clipped the rear of an electric delivery scooter operated by Jamal Ortiz, and continued 2 blocks before being stopped by Officer Alina Ruiz near Sutton Street. Additional allegations included failure to remain and exchange information, disorderly conduct during the stop, and possible attempts to contact a witness after arraignment. Mason's expression barely changed. He seemed bored. That more than anything started the outrage. Because Tasha Bennett was in the courtroom, 31 years old, certified nursing assistant, night shift worker at Silver Pine Assisted Living, single. Mother of 2 boys, ages 9 and 6. Her Honda had not just been a car. It had been the reason she could work double shifts, pick up her children from her aunt's apartment in Cranston, and still make it home before sunrise. Jamal Ortiz was there too, left wrist in a support brace, collarbone still healing from the impact that had thrown him onto the curb. He was 24, a community college student who delivered late-night food to pay tuition. And 2 rows behind them sat Lorraine Bell, 67, retired crossing guard, who had wrenched her hip trying to pull her 10-year-old grandson back from the corner just seconds before Mason's BMW tore through the intersection. 3 victims, 1 smirk. That's when people started leaning forward. Judge Caprio asked the simplest question first. "Mr. Mercer, how do you plead to the amended charges as read?" Carson Vale stood. "Not guilty at this stage, Your Honor, with an understanding that we are prepared to discuss restitution on the property damage and contest the allegations of intimidation." Mason leaned into the microphone before his attorney finished. "This whole thing is ridiculous." Carson's head snapped toward him. "Mason." But it was too late. Judge Caprio looked at the young man for a long, measuring second. "What exactly is ridiculous, sir? The speed, the collision, the witness concerns, or the fact that other people's lives were disrupted by your choices?" Mason shrugged. "It was a scrape, nobody died." That sentence hit the room like a slap. You could feel the air change. Tasha lowered her eyes. Jamal stared at Mason as if he were looking at someone from another species. Lorraine Bell clutched her handbag tighter. Even Carson Vale closed his eyes for half a second, the way a man does when he realizes his client has just poured gasoline onto the hearing before the match is lit. Judge Caprio did not flinch. He only said, "When a person has never had to measure loss, they start using words like scrape for damage that would wreck another family." Mason rolled his shoulders back and let out a short laugh, a laugh in that room. Everyone saw it, everyone stored it away. The judge nodded once at Officer Ruiz. "Officer, you have body cam footage from the stop." "Yes, Your Honor." Carson rose quickly. "Before we play anything, I would request." "You may request after I ask the officer whether she has it," Caprio said, not harshly, just firmly. "Do you?" Ruiz answered, "Yes, Your Honor, full sequence. 11 minutes 14 seconds, audio clear." Mason looked over at her for the first time, and there it was. That slight tilt of the mouth. That dismissive little sneer men wear when they think a uniform is beneath them. He didn't know yet that the body cam would be the first crack in the wall. He didn't know the second crack was already waiting on a flash drive in Donna Vital's hand. And he definitely didn't know that someone he had ignored for years was about to become the voice that broke him in front of the entire city. Before we get to the footage, hit like if you believe the truth has a way of arriving right on time, because what played next was bad. What came after was much worse. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the monitor on the side wall flickered on. Grainy body cam timecode appeared. 10-17-25-23-47-12. Streetlights. Wet pavement. Red and blue reflections pulsing across the hood of a black BMW. The car door opened before Officer Ruiz reached it, and Mason stepped out in a black Moncler jacket, white t-shirt, jeans, expensive sneakers, and the exact expression of someone offended that the world had interrupted his evening. Ruiz's recorded voice came through the speaker. "Sir, get back in the vehicle." Mason on the video laughed. "Do you know who you just pulled over?" Several people in the gallery shifted, not because the line was surprising, because it was exactly as ugly as they expected. Video Ruiz repeated, "Get back in the vehicle." Video Mason stepped closer instead. "You're making a mistake. My father's Victor Mercer." On screen, the camera jerked slightly as Ruiz widened her stance. "That name is not a driver's license, sir." Even in the present courtroom, a murmur went through the benches. Officer Ruiz sat still, eyes front. Then came the next line from the footage. Video Mason said, "You people always do this when you see a good car. You smell money and panic." A sound escaped somewhere behind Tasha Bennett. It might have been disbelief. It might have been disgust. Judge Caprio kept watching. Ruiz's recorded voice stayed measured. "License and registration." Video Mason smirked. "I'll have your badge before breakfast." The screen showed him fishing in his wallet slowly, theatrically, turning his head toward someone off camera, maybe his passenger. Then, clear as a bell, he muttered, "Start recording this. My dad's gonna love it." Carson Vale stood again. "Your Honor, I object to the editorial value being placed on." "But Judge..." Caprio lifted a hand. "Sit down, counselor. The footage is not editorializing. Your client is." Another small laugh moved through the room, but now it wasn't amusement. It was that sharp release people make when power finally meets resistance. The footage continued. Ruiz asked whether Mason had struck another vehicle. Mason denied it. Ruiz asked about the visible scrape along the passenger side and missing mirror cap. Mason shrugged. "Could have been anywhere." Ruiz asked why a witness reported seeing sparks and hearing a rider scream. Mason answered, "People say a lot of things when they want money." And then came the detail nobody in the room had heard before. Officer Ruiz on the video leaned toward the passenger side and said, "Who else was in the car with you?" There was a half-second pause, just enough to matter. Video Mason answered, "No one." Ruiz shone her light. On the rear seat, visible for a moment on the footage, was a woman's sequined heel and a champagne flute tipped on the floor mat. Carson spoke fast. "The passenger issue has already been clarified, Your Honor. A friend exited before." Judge Caprio turned to him. "Clarified by whom? Your memorandum used the phrase possibly earlier transported occupants. That is not a clarification. That is a scented cloud of language." Even Donna Vito looked down to hide a smile. Mason's face had lost a little color. Because now the judge was interested. Because now the question was not just what Mason hit, it was who else had seen it. And because when arrogance starts slipping, it does not fall gracefully. Judge Caprio asked, "Officer Ruiz, were you later able to identify a passenger?" Ruiz nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, Preston Hale, age 23. He initially declined a statement. Then 3 days later, after receiving a preservation notice, he retained counsel." The gallery went still. Mason turned hard toward Carson. Carson kept his eyes on the bench. "Mr. Mercer," said the judge, "did you tell the officer you were alone?" Mason licked his lip. "I mean, technically by then I was." "No," said Caprio. "I did not ask whether you were alone by then. I asked whether you told the officer you were alone." Carson cut in. "My client was under stress." Judge Caprio answered with one of those calm lines people remember because it sounds simple until it stays with them for years. "Stress does not create truth, counselor. It reveals character." That quote would be clipped by lunch. Mason sank back, but he was not beaten. Not yet. He still had the look of a young man who believed every setback was temporary because somewhere, somehow, a more powerful adult would arrive and clean it up. The judge asked for the witness impact sequence. Tasha Bennett stood first. She wore a plain brown cardigan over hospital scrubs and had the tired eyes of someone whose sleep had become a luxury item. Her hair was pulled back. Her hands shook when she unfolded her paper. She had written her statement in blue ink, then crossed out half of it, then written more in the margins. People who live hard don't always speak polished. They speak true. She looked at the judge, then at Mason, then back to the paper. Your Honor, my name is Tasha Bennett. On October 17th, my car was parked outside my sister's apartment while I was upstairs getting my boys ready to sleep. When I heard the crash, I thought maybe a transformer blew. I ran down and saw my Honda pushed halfway up the curb. My youngest, Andre, was standing in the window crying because he knows that car means I can go to work. She stopped to breathe. In the next 2 weeks, I missed 6 shifts. My supervisor covered for me twice, then said she couldn't keep doing it. Ubers to Silver Pine from Cranston at night were too much money. I borrowed. I sold my tablet. I used my grocery card early. My older son asked if we were getting evicted because he heard me crying on the phone. The room was silent now. No rustle, no cough, just Tasha's voice and the faint buzz of the old courthouse lights. She turned and looked straight at Mason. When I got the insurance call, they said someone from your family office wanted to settle quick if I signed papers and kept it private. I want that on the record. I did not want private. I wanted honest. Carson Vale rose. Your Honor. Judge Caprio's gaze cut sideways. Sit. Carson sat. Tasha swallowed. And when I saw him on a phone video laughing outside the stop, saying, "It's just some busted-up Civic," I decided I wanted to come here myself. This time, the sound in the gallery was not a murmur. It was a collective intake of breath. Mason's head snapped up. That video is out of context. Tasha did not blink. So was my whole life after that night. There are moments in a courtroom when nobody needs a gavel to know something has landed. This was one of them. Jamal Ortiz came next. He was taller than Mason by an inch, but he carried himself smaller, like pain had taught him caution. Dark green sweat. Arm brace. Fresh scar near his left eyebrow. He did not bring paper, he brought memory. I was delivering 2 orders from Nico's on Federal Hill, he said. I had 1 bag in the insulated box and 1 on my back. The light was red for traffic on Atwell's. I was crossing when I heard this engine loud like it was trying to prove something. Then I saw headlights cut sideways. He clipped my rear wheel. I went down on my shoulder and face. I remember tasting blood and hearing somebody yell. He lifted his injured arm a little. The doctor says the collarbone healed crooked the first week because I tried to go back to work too fast. I couldn't afford not to. I had a midterm the next Monday. I wrote it on pain medicine. Judge Caprio asked gently, "How are you doing now?" Jamal looked at Mason for a long second. I still brake when I hear a car rev too hard. Sometimes when I cross at night, I wait even when the sign says walk. I know it sounds stupid. It does not sound stupid, the judge said. It sounds human. Jamal nodded once and sat. Then Lorraine Bell rose. She moved carefully, one hand on the bench. Burgundy coat, sensible shoes, hair set neat. The kind of woman who spent a lifetime showing up early and calling people by their names. Her grandson Theo was with her, a skinny 10-year-old in a Navy school uniform, shoes freshly shined for court, clutching a folded paper snowman from some classroom bulletin board. Lorraine did not use notes either. Your Honor, I am not one of the people he hit, but I was on that corner. My grandson was half a step ahead of me. I pulled him back when the car came through. In doing that, I twisted wrong. I have had hip trouble since. She paused, then looked at Mason with a levelness more devastating than anger. I am 67. Pain stays longer when you are 67. But that is not why I am here. I am here because my grandson asked me 3 days later if rich people get different rules when they're in a hurry, and I didn't know what to tell him. That line struck harder than any shout. Theo looked down at his shoes. Judge Caprio asked, "What did you tell him?" Lorraine answered, "I told him we would come to court and find out." If that line doesn't stay with you, nothing will. Drop a comment telling us what answer you think Theo deserved that day, because the hearing was no longer about dents and citations. It was about whether a child would watch justice bend. Judge Caprio sat back. "Mr. Mercer, these are not abstract losses. They are the shape your choices took in other people's homes." Mason folded his arms. "I didn't hit her, and I barely touched the scooter." Jamal looked away like the words themselves were dirty. The judge nodded slowly. "Interesting." That was all he said, just that one word. Then Donna Vital leaned in and whispered something to him. He adjusted his glasses, read the note, and looked directly at Mason. "It appears the court has just received confirmation that a digital extraction from one of the phones seized under warrant has been completed." Carson was up in an instant. "Your Honor, I was not notified of any completed extraction this morning." Officer Ruiz answered, "We were notified at 8:31. Carson turned, "That's 16 minutes ago." Judge Caprio said, "Then you are almost caught up." The entire room knew something had changed. Because phones do not merely remember, they testify. Because young men like Mason often believe deleting is the same as erasing. And because somewhere inside that extraction was a clip no amount of money had managed to bury. When the judge ordered the next file prepared, Mason stopped leaning back. His right leg started bouncing under the table, just once at first, then faster. The confidence was still there. But fear had entered the room and taken a seat beside him. Donna loaded the new file while Carson whispered sharply in Mason's ear. Mason whispered back, "It's nothing." Too fast, too flat, the kind of denial that gives itself away by trying not to exist. The monitor flickered again. This was not body cam. This was vertical phone video, shaky and dim, clearly recorded from the passenger seat. Time stamp, 11:42 p.m. Bass-heavy music, dashboard lights. Atwell's Avenue streaking ahead in wet lines of red and white. Someone laughing. Someone else saying, "Yo, chill." Then Mason's voice, clear enough to slice the room open. "Watch this light. Watch this light." The car accelerated. A woman's voice off-screen said, "Mason, stop." He laughed. "It's empty." The red light flashed on the screen. He didn't stop. The next 2 seconds were chaos. Horn, screech, a blur of silver handlebars, a thud, the camera dropped. The woman screamed. Someone shouted, "You hit him, you hit him." And Mason's voice came back, louder now, angry, not scared. "Shut up, everyone shut up." The video ended. Nobody in the courtroom moved. It felt like the walls themselves had leaned in to hear. Then from somewhere near the back, a man whispered, "Oh my God." Judge Caprio did not comment immediately. He allowed the silence to do its work. It stretched. It settled. It forced Mason to sit inside the echo of his own recklessness. Finally, the judge asked, "Mr. Mercer, is that your voice?" Carson said, "We would request time to review chain of custody." Judge Caprio kept his eyes on Mason. "I did not ask your attorney whether he would like more time. I asked whether that is your voice." Mason's mouth opened, closed, "I don't know." Caprio nodded. "Very well, the court knows." That sentence drew a sharp breath from half the room. Then came the first real consequence moment. Officer Ruiz explained that the video had been recovered from Preston Hale's phone after forensic reconstruction. Hale had deleted the clip approximately 6 minutes after the stop. He had also deleted 3 text exchanges from Mason sent the next morning. Donna handed copies to the attorneys and the judge. The screen displayed the texts one by one. "Mason, you were never in the car." "Mason, if they ask, I picked you up after." "Mason, don't get stupid over this." Then the last one. Mason, my dad can make things hard for people who forget loyalty. The gallery erupted. Not screaming, not chaos, just a wave of human reaction so strong Sergeant Donnelly had to step forward and raise a hand for quiet. Tasha covered her mouth. Jamal stared at the floor. Lorraine Bell closed her eyes. Even Kendra Lynn, Victor Mercer's assistant, looked like she wanted the ground to open beneath her chair. Carson stood again, but weaker now. Your Honor, text messages from a panicked young man do not constitute an actual threat. Judge Caprio turned toward him. Counselor, language becomes threat when it is used to bend another person's truth. Then he looked at Mason. When you are accustomed to getting your way, Mr. Mercer, honesty from other people starts to feel like betrayal. That is your problem, not theirs. Clipworthy quote number 2. Everybody in that room knew it. Mason snapped. You're making me into some villain because people get emotional in court. Jamal actually laughed once, bitter and shocked, like he couldn't believe the sentence he had just heard. Judge Caprio leaned forward. No, sir, your own words are doing that heavy lifting. This should have been the moment Mason adjusted. The smart moment. The survival moment. The moment he dropped the attitude, admitted the obvious, and let his expensive attorney salvage a future from the wreckage. He didn't. Instead, he made the choice that changed everything. He looked past the judge, toward the gallery, saw the faces staring at him, and something ugly rose in him. Maybe humiliation, maybe panic, maybe the first taste of a world that would not rearrange itself to protect him. Whatever it was, it came out as contempt. Half these people are here because they want a show, he said. This place loves acting like I'm the problem because my last name's Mercer. A woman in the back said, No, baby, it's your mouth. Even Judge Caprio almost smiled at that. But the judge answered more seriously. Your last name is not the reason you are in jeopardy. It is the reason you arrived believing you were not. That line hit like a bell. And still, unbelievably, Mason pushed harder. He turned slightly, eyes narrowed, voice lower now, colder. My father pays more in taxes than most of this room makes in a year. You could hear the gallery react in pieces, a hiss, a muttered wow, the scrape of Lorraine Bell's grandson shifting in his seat, Tasha's shoulders stiffening, Carson Vale whispering, Stop talking, through clenched teeth. Judge Caprio's face did not change. Then perhaps your father can also appreciate the value of accountability. Mason muttered, not quite under his breath. This is exactly why people like us don't trust courts. That was it, not the loudest line, not even the crudest, but it revealed the heart of the problem, people like us. As if justice were some customer service inconvenience for the wealthy. As if us and them were acceptable categories in front of a bench where the law was supposed to flatten status and hear facts. Judge Caprio let the words sit between them, people like us. Mason realized too late what he'd said. You know what I mean. I do, said the judge, and that is why I am concerned. Before the defense could redirect, Judge Caprio called a brief recess. Not because he needed it. Because Mason did. The courtroom rose in a crackle of benches and whispers. Reporters near the back, including local freelance journalist Nia Brooks, were already typing. Outside the room, the hall filled with courthouse staff pretending not to linger. Everybody knew. Everybody felt it. This was the kind of hearing that would be clipped, reposted, analyzed, argued over at barber shops and dinner tables by nightfall. And then something happened in that recess that nobody expected. Theo Bell, Lorraine's grandson, dropped his paper. Snowman. It slid under the defense table. Mason bent automatically to grab it before Sergeant Donnelly could. For one strange, human second, the room paused. He picked up the paper carefully. White construction paper, blue crayon buttons, a crooked smile. Theo reached for it. Mason hesitated. Thanks, Theo said quietly. Mason handed it back. Their eyes met. Theo's were not angry, that would have been easier. They were confused. Children do that sometimes. They look at you with the purest form of judgment there is, disappointment unclouded by performance. Mason looked away first. And maybe that was the first real crack. Maybe. But when court resumed, nobody yet understood how deep this story ran, or how long its shadow had been following Mason Mercer before he ever put that BMW in gear. Hit that subscribe button if you believe the truth gets heavier the longer someone tries to outrun it, because the next revelation did not come from the crash. It came from Mason's life. Judge Caprio returned to the bench with a thinner folder laid on top of the case file. The court has received a pre-sentence social history addendum, prepared in anticipation of possible resolution discussions, he said. Normally, I do not place significant weight on these at this stage. In this case, I will note only the portions relevant to rehabilitation and risk. Carson stiffened. Your Honor, if we are moving toward character history, I would prefer a full hearing. So would I, said the judge. I would also have preferred a defendant who understood silence. A faint laugh, then stillness. Caprio continued. Mr. Mercer is 22 years old, educated at St. Bartholomew Academy in Newport, then 2 semesters at Boston University before withdrawing. No prior criminal convictions. 4 prior moving violations in Massachusetts, 2 in Connecticut. 1 dismissed in Newport after attendance at a driver responsibility course. This court also notes a pattern of private settlements relating to property damage incidents not resulting in charges. Tasha looked up at that. Jamal frowned. Lorraine Bell slowly shook her head, as if a suspicion had just been confirmed. The judge went on. The addendum also reflects repeated school disciplinary notations involving aggression, alcohol misuse, and threatening language toward staff. It further reflects the death of Mr. Mercer's mother, Elaine Mercer, from an accidental overdose when the defendant was 15. That changed the room. Not into forgiveness, not yet, but into something more complicated. Because pain does not excuse harm. Still, it explains contours. It shows where some people began bleeding before they started cutting others. Mason stared at the table. It was the first time he had looked young. Judge Caprio said it plainly. I am not reading this to invite sympathy. I am reading it because this court must decide whether arrogance in this case is merely habit or armor. Carson seized the opening. Your Honor, my client has grown up in an unstable emotional environment, under extraordinary public pressure, with an absent father and... Mason snapped up, don't. Carson froze, Mason. I said don't. There it was again, the anger, but now people noticed something else beneath it, shame. Judge Caprio studied him. You object to your own history being mentioned. Mason's voice dropped. I object to him acting like he knows me. Caprio answered, perhaps he does not, but your conduct has introduced you rather thoroughly this morning. That line sank deep. Then the judge called Officer Ruiz back and asked the question that shifted the case from ugly to devastating. Officer, during your investigation, did you learn whether any contact had been made with the victims before insurance communications? Ruiz said yes. By whom? A woman identifying herself as Marisol Ortiz on behalf of the Mercer residence staff. Jamal's head lifted. Mason's eyes moved sharply toward him. The judge noticed both. Mr. Ortiz, do you know Ms. Marisol Ortiz? Jamal swallowed. She's my mother. Another silence, different this time, sharper. Officer Ruiz continued. She stated she learned of the collision from her son, then separately learned the vehicle involved belonged to Mr. Mercer, whose family home she has worked in for 14 years as a housekeeper. She said she attempted to contact the Mercer family directly before counsel became involved. The room almost couldn't process it fast enough. Jamal stared at Mason with a new kind of disbelief. Not stranger to stranger. Something worse. The recognition that the person who hurt you had lived adjacent to your life all along and still never saw you. Judge Caprio asked, "Mr. Mercer, did you know Mr. Ortiz's mother worked in your home?" Mason's answer took too long. "I mean, I know a Marisol." Jamal gave one bitter nod, like a piece of the universe had just clicked into place. "Of course you do," he said under his breath. People in the gallery felt that line. Because now, the story wasn't only that Mason had injured a delivery rider. It was that he had injured the son of a woman who had cleaned up after him for more than a decade, and he had still reduced him to people wanting money. That is the kind of revelation that changes how a room sees a human being. And still there was more. Donna handed the judge another paper, a letter. Caprio glanced at it, then at counsel. This letter was submitted by Marisol Ortiz and copied to both parties at 7:52 this morning. I have confirmed that, counselor. Carson looked down at the copy in front of him, face tightening. I have it. The judge asked Jamal, "Do you object to the court reading a portion?" Jamal shook his head slowly. "No, Your Honor." Caprio unfolded the letter. His voice softened just enough to let the words carry themselves. "Your Honor, my name is Marisol Ortiz. I have worked in the Mercer home since 2011. I helped raise my son and also in many ways watched Mason grow up in the corners where wealthy families forget staff can see. I saw a boy who was often left alone with expensive things and no guidance. I also saw a boy who stopped looking people in the eye around age 16. Please do not mistake this for a defense. My son was hurt. Mr. Mercer tried to hide the truth. But I am asking the court to understand that some people are raised to believe kindness is optional because someone else is always paid to absorb the damage." No one moved. Caprio read the last lines. "If there is punishment, let it teach. If there is mercy, let it cost him something real. And please tell him my son's name is Jamal. He is not a problem to be solved." By the time the judge finished, Tasha Bennett was wiping her cheek. Lorraine Bell looked down at Theo and squeezed his shoulder. Jamal's jaw flexed hard as if he were trying not to unravel in public. Mason did not look at anyone. His eyes were fixed on the wood grain of the table like it had become the only stable thing in his world. You could see something happening behind his face. Not repentance yet, not quite. But confusion, disorientation. The first collapse of the story he had been telling himself, the story where everybody else was opportunistic and he was merely inconvenienced. Judge Caprio set the letter down carefully. "Mr. Mercer, do you know why this letter is more powerful than anything your attorney has said this morning?" Mason said nothing. "Because it does not ask me to forget what you did. It asks me to make sure you finally understand it." That was quote number 4, and maybe the deepest one yet. At this point, the hearing could still have turned toward negotiated consequence. License suspension, restitution, structured probation, court-ordered service. Painful, yes. Humiliating, certainly, but survivable. Then Nia Brooks, the reporter in the back, raised her hand. Not to speak out of turn, to signal Donna. There was an issue with the public media table. A source had just sent a copy of a second video already circulating privately. Sergeant Donnelly moved fast, took the phone, conferred with Ruiz, then with Carson and the judge. After a brief bench consultation, Caprio allowed the state to mark it for identification only, pending authentication. Mason saw Donnelly take that phone and went pale. Not annoyed, not embarrassed. Pale. Everyone noticed. Because when a smug defendant turns white at the sight of a phone, you know the truth on that screen is not kind. The judge did not play it immediately. He did something smarter. He asked a simpler question first. "Mr. Mercer, after your initial release, Were you instructed by counsel not to discuss the case publicly? Carson answered before Mason could. Yes. And did he comply? Carson hesitated. That hesitation was louder than a confession. Judge Caprio said, Mr. Vale. Carson exhaled through his nose, not fully. What does not fully mean? It means my client exercised poor judgment. Caprio's expression never shifted. Counselor, in law as in medicine, precision matters, was their social media activity. Carson looked down. Yes. What kind? A private story post, visible to a limited group. Ruiz cut in with permission, screen recorded by a recipient and preserved. Mason shut his eyes. There it was, confirmation. The judge nodded. Then we will take that up now. The room leaned in again. Another cliff edge. Another moment where people could feel the whole narrative tipping toward something irreversible. Donna connected the file. The screen lit up with a selfie video recorded the morning after the crash. Mason's face filled the frame, freshly showered, smirking, expensive kitchen in the background, marble counters gleaming behind him. He was talking to the camera like it was a friend. Public service announcement, video Mason said. If you drive anything nice in this city, get ready. One little bump and suddenly everybody's neck hurts, everybody's cousin is a witness, and every cop thinks they hit the lottery. Why? He laughed. Then he took a sip of something from a glass. And if this somehow ends up in court, don't worry. There are judges for regular people, and there are judges who understand how the world works. The video stopped. No one in the room even breathed right away. Because that wasn't recklessness. That was worldview. That was rot talking in its natural voice. Tasha looked like she might throw up. Jamal turned away. Theo Bell whispered, Grandma, because even a child could tell something awful had just been revealed. Judge Caprio folded his hands. Mr. Mercer, he said quietly, I understand the world very well. Mason did not speak. And one of the things I understand, the judge continued, is that a courtroom is the one room where your last name gets less important, not more. There it was, the quote that would travel everywhere. A courtroom is the one room where your last name gets less important, not more. People would print it, post it, repeat it at kitchen tables, but right then in that room it was not content, it was correction. Mason's breathing had changed, fast now, shallow. He was still trying to sit tall, but his hands were no longer steady. One thumb rubbed hard against the edge of the table. His lower lip had gone almost colorless. And then, because humiliation can turn into rage in seconds, he made the worst choice of his life. He stood up. Sergeant Donnelly straightened instantly. Carson grabbed Mason's sleeve. Sit down. Mason jerked free. This is a joke, he said, voice ringing through the courtroom. You're turning this into some public lesson because cameras love you. That's what this is. Mr. Mercer, Judge Caprio said, calm as stone, sit down. But Mason had crossed into that dangerous zone where pride cannot retreat because retreat feels like death. No, he shot back. You don't get to grandstand and act holy. You sit up there and pretend everybody's equal, but you know exactly who my family is. One call from my father and this courthouse would be begging for donations. The gasp that ripped through the room felt physical. Lorraine Bell clutched her chest. Theo stared wide-eyed. Tasha stood halfway up before sitting back. Nia Brooks stopped typing because even she, a reporter, understood she had just watched the hearing leap from bad to historic. Mason pointed at the bench. You think you can embarrass me? You work for people like me. It was out, all of it, raw, unfiltered, ugly. The line he could never take back. Hit like if you believe that sentence deserved consequences. Because what Judge Caprio did next is why that courtroom fell into complete silence. He did not shout. He did not bang the gavel. He simply removed his glasses, set them on the bench, and looked at Mason with a sadness so measured it was more devastating than anger. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "money can delay consequences, it cannot cancel them." Not loud, not dramatic, certain. Then he added, "And if you believe I work for your family, then today will be educational for both of us." That was the moment everything changed. Sergeant Donnelly moved to Mason's side. Carson whispered urgently, "Sit down." Kendra Lynn had both hands over her mouth. Officer Ruiz didn't move at all. Professionals don't celebrate when the truth destroys someone. They just witness it. Mason remained standing for another second too long. Then, suddenly aware of the 100 eyes on him, he sat. But the damage was done. Judge Caprio ordered the courtroom sealed for 10 minutes to consider contempt and reopened on the record at 10:16 a.m. When everyone returned, the air felt heavier, the kind of heavy that settles after lightning hits nearby. Caprio spoke directly. "The court has considered the defendant's outburst. I will reserve contempt sentencing until final disposition because I want the totality of this conduct visible in one place. Mr. Mercer, I strongly advise you to understand that whatever protections you imagined existed before today are gone." Mason stared ahead. The judge continued, "We now come to the question that matters more than theatrics. Is there, under the arrogance, a human being capable of understanding harm?" No answer. So the judge made one more move. He called Preston Hale. The friend, the passenger, the one whose sequined date had bolted before the stop. He entered through the side door in a beige sweater and looked like a man who had not slept well in weeks. Hair uncombed, hands red from nervous rubbing. He took the oath and sat. Carson looked furious. Mason looked betrayed. Judge Caprio asked, "Mr. Hale, were you in the vehicle on October 17th? "Yes." "Did Mr. Mercer instruct you to deny that?" "Yes." "Did he threaten you?" Preston swallowed. "He said if I screwed this up, his dad would make sure my apartment deal died and my father's job with Mercer Commercial got revisited." A ripple moved across the room. Another layer. Another revelation. Preston went on, voice cracking once. "I deleted the video because I panicked. But I sent it first to my sister because I thought if something happened, somebody should have it." Judge Caprio asked the question everyone needed. "Why are you telling the truth now?" Preston looked at Jamal, then at Tasha, then at Mason. "Because I went to see the scooter after it was impounded. There was blood on the grip, real blood, and because Mason kept talking like the main tragedy was bad press." That line hit Mason harder than any accusation yet. Not because it was dramatic, because it sounded true. Then Preston said the sentence that opened the door to the unexpected twist. "And because Marisol called me." Every head turned. "Why did she call you?" asked the judge. Preston's eyes lowered. "She said, 'You boys are not bad enough to become men who bury people alive with lies. Tell the truth before it becomes your character.'" There are some lines that don't sound written because life occasionally produces language too exact to improve. This was one of them. Mason's face tightened as if he had been struck. Preston wasn't finished. "She also said something else. She said Mason's mother would be ashamed of this." At that, Mason looked up so sharply the chair squeaked beneath him. For the first time all morning, he looked less arrogant than wounded. "Don't talk about my mother," he said. Preston answered, not cruelly, just tired. "Then stop making people talk about the son she raised." Boom, another line that landed hard. Judge Caprio let the silence widen again. Then he said, "We will take a 5-minute pause before final statements." But before anyone could stand, Donna stepped forward with yet another paper. Her face had changed, not startled, moved. "Your Honor," she said softly, "there is one more letter, hand-delivered." "From whom?" "Elaine Mercer, Foundation Archive Director, through Family Counsel." Carson looked alarmed. "Your Honor, I have not seen." "It was copied to you 1 minute ago," Donna said. The judge scanned the first lines and lifted his eyes slowly toward Mason. "This," he said, "appears to be a letter written by your mother." You could have heard a pin slide across the wood floor. Mason stopped breathing for half a second. Carson whispered, "We object to relevance." Judge Caprio answered, "So noted." Then he looked at Mason. "Do you object?" The entire room waited. Mason's throat worked. How old is it?" Donna answered quietly, "Dated June 12, 2018. He would have been 15. Mason stared at the paper in the judge's hand like it might explode. And in that suspended second, every person in that room understood the hearing had moved beyond punishment. It was now about whether a young man who had spent years hiding behind money and anger was about to collide, at full speed, with the last honest voice he ever trusted. Before we hear what that letter said, drop a comment telling us the moment you knew Mason's mask was slipping, because what happened next did not just humble him. It broke something open. Judge Caprio did not read the whole letter. Only the portion the archive director and family counsel had jointly approved for relevance. It had been part of Elaine Mercer's private writing, preserved after her death, apparently intended for Mason if he ever reached what she called the age of dangerous certainty. Caprio's voice softened, but not theatrically. "Mason, if you are reading this years from now, there is something I am afraid no one around you will tell you plainly. Wealth can put you in rooms with soft carpets and hard hearts. It can make every mistake disappear before you learn from it. If that happens, you will begin to confuse protection with love. The people who clean for us, drive us, fix what we break, and endure our moods are not supporting characters in your life. They are lives as real as yours. If you ever speak to them like they exist below you, I will have failed you in the most important way." Mason didn't move. No one did. Caprio kept reading. "And if one day a good man in authority refuses to be impressed by our name, listen to him. He may be saving you from becoming a smaller person than your money can hide." The judge stopped. The courtroom was so quiet the old heating pipes could be heard ticking in the wall. Mason's eyes were shining now, but he still fought it. You could see him trying to hold on to the posture that had carried him through school suspensions, expensive settlements, private apologies written by publicists, and a father who treated vulnerability like contamination. Judge Caprio set the paper down. "Mr. Mercer, I do not know your mother, but I suspect she would have wanted this moment used well." Mason whispered, almost to himself, "Where did you get that?" Carson answered, strained, "Family counsel must have released it after." "No," Mason snapped louder, "why now?" No one answered, because everyone in the room already knew the answer. Now, because this was the first time in years anyone had managed tea. Oh, stop the machine long enough for truth to catch up. Judge Caprio invited final victim statements. Tasha declined. She had said enough. Jamal stood again, but only for one sentence. "I don't need him ruined," he said. "I need him awake." Then Lorraine Bell surprised everyone. She rose carefully, asked permission to speak once more, and faced the bench. "Your Honor," she said, "I came here angry. I still believe he should be punished. But I watched that boy when his mother's words were read. That was the first honest face he showed all morning. If there is a way to hold him accountable without turning him into whatever made him this empty, I hope the court finds it." That was the compassion moment nobody expected. Tasha looked startled. Jamal looked conflicted. Theo looked relieved without quite knowing why. Mason looked up at Lorraine Bell with raw confusion, as if mercy from someone he had frightened made less sense than condemnation. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. "Mrs. Bell, Mercy is not the opposite of accountability. Mercy begins after accountability. There was quote number 5. Then came the ultimate confrontation, the one the entire hearing had been building toward. The judge turned to Mason. Mr. Mercer, this is your final opportunity to speak before disposition on the pending counts, the intimidation, concerns, and contempt. I am not interested in excuses. I am interested in whether you can finally tell the truth without help. Carson whispered, say as little as possible. Mason did not look at him. He stood, and at first nothing came out, just breath, uneven, visible in his chest. When he finally spoke, the voice was lower than before, smaller, not polished, real. I was driving. No one reacted. The room seemed afraid to break the moment. I saw the red light, he continued. I thought I could beat it. Preston told me to slow down. Ava told me to stop. I didn't. I clipped the scooter. I felt it. I knew I hit something. Jamal closed his eyes. Mason swallowed hard. When Officer Ruiz stopped me, I was more worried about my father finding out I wrecked another car than I was about whether anyone was hurt. That one cost him. You could hear it in the way the sentence came out, scraped raw. I told Preston to lie. I told myself everybody would exaggerate for money because that's how I've been taught to see things. He glanced at Jamal, then away. I knew Marisol worked in our house. I didn't know Jamal was her son because I never asked enough about her life to know. That line broke Kendra Lynn. She looked down and wiped her eyes quickly. Mason went on. I posted the video because I was angry and embarrassed. I said things about judges and people in this city that, he inhaled sharply, that make me sick now. Judge Caprio did not rescue him. He let him finish. Mason looked at Tasha. I'm sorry your boys heard you cry because of me. He looked at Jamal. I'm sorry I made your pain sound like a scam. He looked at Lorraine Bell and Theo. I'm sorry I made a kid wonder if rules depend on your bank account. Then he looked at the judge. And I'm sorry for threatening this court. There it was at last. Not enough to undo, never enough to undo, but real. Judge Caprio asked the hardest question next. What are you asking this court for? Mason's lips pressed together. Not mercy first, he said, a chance to earn any later. The line was not slick, that's why it landed. Caprio nodded once. That is the first intelligent thing you have said today. A faint, breathless laugh moved through the room, not mocking now, relieved. The judge began sentencing. On reckless driving, failure to remain, and obstruction-related conduct, the court imposed a suspended term conditioned on strict compliance, 24 months of supervised probation, immediate 12-month license suspension, mandatory trauma-informed driver rehabilitation, full restitution to all named victims within 30 days, and 500 hours of community service split between the rehabilitation wing at Rhode Island Hospital and a city traffic safety outreach program serving teenagers cited for dangerous driving. On contempt, 30 days suspended. On intimidation-related findings, no separate criminal penalty at that stage, but explicit warning that any further witness contact outside counsel would activate review. Then Judge Caprio added the part no one expected, and perhaps the part that truly changed Mason's life. You will report, Caprio said, for 100 of those community service hours under the supervision of the Victim Services Coordinator, not to perform token tasks, but to listen. You will hear from families whose losses cannot be settled quietly. You will not speak at those sessions unless asked. You have used your voice recklessly enough. Mason nodded. The judge wasn't done. You will also write by hand one letter to each victim in this matter to be reviewed by probation before delivery. No lawyer language. No. Image management. If the first line sounds rehearsed, you start over. A few smiles flickered through the room. And Caprio said, 3 months from today, you will return to this courtroom with proof of restitution, proof of service, and proof that this morning was not merely an emotional performance under pressure. Mason said, yes, Your Honor. Caprio leaned forward slightly. I hope for your sake that phrase means more to you now. It does, Mason whispered. Then came the last surprise of the day. Jamal stood before anyone dismissed him. Your Honor. Yes. If he's serious, Jamal hesitated. The whole room waited. Our community college runs a Safe Streets campaign every spring. We lost volunteers last year. If he actually does the work and if probation clears it, he can come hear what dangerous driving sounds like from people who don't get to hire attorneys. Mason looked stunned. Judge Caprio asked, Mr. Ortiz, are you offering participation or grace? Jamal answered, both, but he only gets the second if he shows up for the first. That line might have been the deepest lesson of the day. Judge Caprio nodded. That is a fair condition. Lorraine Bell reached down and squeezed Theo's hand. There's your answer, she whispered. Theo looked up. What answer? The one about whether rich people get different rules. He glanced toward Mason, then toward the bench. Not today, he said. No one in that room would ever forget that child saying those 2 words. Not today. The hearing adjourned at 11:28 a.m. But the story did not end when the gavel came down. Because as the courtroom began to empty, Mason did something nobody expected. He did not flee. He did not hide behind Carson Vale or Kendra Lynn or a side exit. He turned toward Marisol Ortiz. She had not been visible earlier because she arrived late and sat near the rear after handing in her letter. Small woman, gray sweater, hands rough from years of work. The kind of face some wealthy families remember only when dinner must be served or a stain must disappear. Mason walked toward her slowly, like every step hurt. Sergeant Donnelly watched but did not intervene. Jamal stood too, instantly protective. Mason stopped at a respectful distance, not close enough to corner, not far enough to perform detachment. Marisol, he said. She looked at him steadily. Yes, Mason. Not Mr. Mercer, not Sir, Mason. He seemed to hear his own name differently coming from her. I'm sorry, he said. She nodded once. Good, now become a person who understands what that means. Nothing dramatic, no embrace, no swelling music moment, just truth from a woman who had spent 14 years cleaning the edges of a life that had never bothered to see her clearly. Then she turned to Jamal. Mijo, vamos. And they left. If you're still with us, share this with someone who believes justice is strongest when it doesn't have to scream. Because the months after that hearing proved whether Mason's breakdown was real or just another rich kid crisis in a room full of witnesses. 3 months later, on February 18, 2026, Courtroom 2 be filled again. Not as packed as the first hearing. Viral moments always attract the loudest crowds the first time, but enough people came that the side benches were full by 8:30 a.m. Nia Brooks returned. Tasha Bennett returned. Jamal was there, this time without the brace. Lorraine and Theo came again. So did Marisol. Officer Ruiz stood in the back on a day off. Even Carson Vale showed up, though no one had required him to. Mason arrived early. That alone told its own story. No Tom Ford jacket, no flash watch, no assistant with coffee, dark charcoal suit off the rack still neat but unremarkable, plain navy tie, cheap black dress shoes polished carefully, hair a little longer, face leaner. He carried a manila folder and a notebook worn at the corners. And he said quietly to Donna Vito, "Good morning." She blinked, then answered, "Good morning, Mr. Mercer." He nodded to Sergeant Donnelly, to Officer Ruiz, to Jamal, to Tasha, to Lorraine. Not one giant theatrical apology tour, just recognition. That matters. Because arrogance announces, humility notices. When Judge Caprio took the bench, his first question was simple. "Mr. Mercer, have you complied?" Mason handed over the folder through counsel. Proof of restitution, paid in full, not from Victor Mercer, from a court-supervised account funded partly by liquidation of Mason's leased car agreement, sale of a watch, and wages from approved employment at a marine supply warehouse in Warwick. Community service log, 178 hours complete. Evaluation from Victim Services Coordinator. Attendance letters from the Rhode Island Hospital Trauma Rehab Wing. Reflective statements from traffic safety workshops. A signed note from the Community College Safe Streets program. Judge Caprio read in silence for nearly 2 minutes. That silence felt different from the first hearing. It wasn't suspense. It was me. Jurement. Then he looked at Jamal. "Mr. Ortiz, you invited him to participate in your program. Did he attend?" Jamal leaned back and crossed his arms. He missed the first bus connection and still got there 10 minutes early for the session. A few people smiled. He listened, Jamal added, mostly too quietly. Students kept trying to bait him because they knew who he was. He didn't fight with them. One kid asked if wealthy people ever change or just get better at acting sorry. Mason said, "I don't know yet, but if I ever act sorry instead of being sorry, you should tell me to leave." The room absorbed that. Judge Caprio turned to Tasha Bennett. "Ms. Bennett." She cleared her throat. "I got the restitution. I bought a used Subaru Forester, not fancy, but it runs. He also wrote me a letter. I made my sister read it first because I didn't trust it." A tiny smile. It sounded like him, not a lawyer. "Do you wish to say more?" Tasha looked at Mason. "Yeah, my boys sleep fine again. That matters. Keep doing whatever you're doing." Mason nodded, eyes lowered. "I will." Lorraine Bell spoke next without being asked. "I watched him after the hearing while everyone else went out to cameras. He sat on a bench alone for 15 minutes. I remember thinking he looked like a child who had finally heard the word no in a language he couldn't dodge." She looked at the judge. "I believe he was sincere that day. I believe he's trying now. I also believe trying is the least he owes." Caprio smiled slightly. "Mrs. Bell, your standards are appropriately severe." Theo had grown bolder. He raised his hand. The courtroom chuckled. Judge Caprio said, "Young man, if your grandmother allows it, you may speak." Theo stood beside her bench. "I just wanted to say he came to my school crosswalk with the safety people. He didn't talk first. He held the signs and passed out reflectors. Then when a guy in a pickup rolled through the stop, he ran out and yelled louder than the crossing guard." That broke the room into real laughter. Even Mason laughed, surprised and embarrassed. Judge Caprio asked, "Did he do a good job?" Theo thought about it carefully. He looked terrified the whole time, so yes. People laughed again, warm this time. But the deepest part of the follow-up came from Marisol Ortiz. She stood with both hands clasped and said, "Your Honor, after the hearing, Mason came to the house where I no longer work and asked if he